Where did we leave off last time? Well, we have this recurring case, it's a Luca case. We're not going to make the whole synopsis, but basically is we have Machlokes Hafaskim, literally two bezin. Each one believes that they're doing the correct halacha, and the other one is wrong, and vice versa. The shala is two questions, really, right? This is the important part. So, one thing is for sure, the concept of Phronesis. This will be using the whole time. Phronesis, right? Phronesis is basically it's the act of phronimos, somebody who has attained phronesis, is using his ability to see what the salient features are and to decide what the correct thing to do at the correct time, the correct person, void, right? That is basically what phronesis is. Now, so the definition of phronesis, right, is that it's truth-attaining state, and if it is activated, if it was done correctly, then by definition it is true. The question over here is, does somebody who is a phronimos, does he automatically have phronesis? That's the question that we're trying to understand. And he's saying there's no clear thing in Aristotle if it is that the case automatically, and the simple way to be, take a few texts in Aristotle and say what exactly does, what can we take out that he believes. However, I think the correct way really is to dissect the whole thing, to dissect the whole theory, the whole understanding of the ethics, and then see what has to be true for such and such to be. In other words, it's very simple to try to import Aristotle and just say, I think however, we have to go to the actual structure of the whole theory and then see what has to be true or what will be true according to these particular readings. And then practically what makes a difference to us is which parts do we continue with, do we stay with, etc. To become more clear as we go along. Now, if every single person that exhibits, that activates, that does phronesis has to be by definition that he does it correctly, that means he's infallible, and if you're saying that it's possible to make a mistake, that is the fallible thesis as we termed it last week. Now, we said there's a very important distinction, that is the first order and second order recognition. That is, the person, the phronimos, or the person who, or it's not even phronimos, or goofy, the person who is trying to do practical reasoning and what the correct act to do, right? The question is, how does he know that he has achieved the correct phronesis? It means even if you're not a phronimos technically, meaning you're just working, trying to do the correct thing, lamasa, how do I know, me, myself, how do I know that I did the correct thing? That's the first order recognition issue. The second order recognition problem is that how does a outsider, how does he know who to choose out two things? First of all, as a mentor, let's say, and second of all, it comes for us, a guy la halacha, how do you know who should you choose, who's the correct person, right? Now, the simple thing is follow the genuine phronimos, right? Go follow the person that is a phronimos. But obviously, that's, I would say, how am I supposed to know who the genuine thing is? So even though I might have a truth condition that the correct thing to do is to follow the one that is the phronimos, that doesn't give me the ability to know who to choose, right? That's a dova pushat. Now, Aristotle tries to give certain klulim, certain parameters, right? A person has a good upbringing, a person that has a law, the person that is, over time, you see that he acts the way that they... Alles is fine of oil, but none of them is something mutually exclusive of two people outwardly exhibiting the same thing. Therefore, although it's not like he's not leaving us with anything, but to go say that I have a clear truth condition, a true practical way of finding out is not. Now, that was one thing we did yesterday, and we did last week. The other distinction, so we said it's an analytical distinction, because Aristotle himself does not distinguish it as such, because for him, the definition of a phronimos, somebody that actually his desire with his practical reasoning go hand in hand. However, we said for our purposes, and in truth, we can analytically distinguish different aspects of it. And to be in the Gaiatos, we're trying to understand where mistakes can happen. So we termed it the Conative and cognitive, right? So last week we just made two differences, right? We called it the cognitive integration, and we called cognitive, and that was cognitive and cognitive correctness. I think this week we should really split into three, and then end up being four. Now there's three terms, and then if we take it apart altogether, we'll have four different terms, and later we'll see how many other, in the whole reasoning, the whole habituation, right? It gets divided into many different things, and each one makes a difference where the error happens, and then to sort of to concretize what exactly we're asking here when it comes to the case of the Bezdin. Now, so the Aristotelian theory of practical reasoning is like this. You have, he says, so theoretical reasoning is not and practically is not a practical syllogism. Is basically right. But let's say Kad Misoilam, for instance, is a theoretical metaphysical proposition. Of course, it has a truth. It can be either true or false. However, it doesn't end in an action. Practical reasoning is something which ends in an action. Now, practical reasoning, and according to this Aristotle's theory at least, right? Not in Aristotle, meaning other philosophers hold they don't think Kant is famous for that, but let's stay focused on Aristotle for now. That you have the desire. Desire is what makes a practical reasoning. Then obviously is if it's ending with an action, meaning ending with and therefore you should do such and such, then by definition it's obviously it's going towards an end, right? In other words, the whole reasoning is towards an end. So the question over here is, what is defining, what is giving me this end? That is what he terms desire. So in other words, we have desire, a person desires such and such, the practical reasoning then goes and walks through all the steps which he will need to achieve his desired end, his desired goal, and then he does it. So we have a double step, right? You have the desire, which is what starts all the practical reasoning, and then you have the practical reasoning, which ends in it's called a practical syllogism, it ends in an act of actually doing it. I want to do such and such, and this is how I get to it, therefore I'm going to do such and such. That is Aristotle's theory of action. We read actually a bit of it in the Anima, and then on the movement of animals. We'll probably get to it a little more finely minute next week, as the goal at least. But what the guy for our discussion today is that you have desire. Desire gives the end, what you want, and then the practical reasoning is how you get to it. Now, if you reasoned wrongly, right? So now the truth condition, meaning truth over here, means that it's good or bad. In other words, a clever person is the one whose desire is what he desires, which is, it's not a true desire. In other words, yes, it's truth in the actual thing, but we call it an incorrect. So we're going to call it incorrect set of truth because we use truth slightly different today's days, and therefore it's going to just get confusing. So it is not a correct desire. He's desiring something wrong, and his practical reasoning will tell him how to get to that wrong, right? So in others, we gave him Musha last week, let's say a fundraiser. It doesn't be just because he is very good at getting the funds of which he wants, does not mean, meaning for his organization, one that hired him, does not mean that it was a correct desire, his correct thing, right? So in other words, so when we say that we have we said that we have conative correctness and cognitive correctness. I'm going to divide it down to three. I have a conative integration, conative correctness, and cognitive correctness. Now, cognitive correctness is a simple Aristotelian Phronesis case, which a judgment truly identifies what is the right end, and that's what he wants, that's what he desires, right? That is ultimately that is from whenever Aristotle discusses phronesis, phronimos, that's referring to. You have a cognitive correctness, he actually apprehended what the correct thing here to do is and how to go about it, and he actually did it. That is the ethical human being. However, as I said, that I can say that we have a desire, and then we have the choice. We have desire and a choice, and then you have the judgment of what the correct thing to do is, right? In other words, and then we have the conative correctness that the desired end is generally right. Meaning, if this person has the wrong desire, but he thinks it is the correct desire, and his practical reasoning is to go bring about it, right? So in other words, the wicked person, the person that is clever, would have the wrong desire, and he could be perfectly aware and just doesn't care and is doing it anyway, right? That's how we sort of refer to an unethical person. The person who is unethical is one that has the wrong desire, And he's very good at doing it, right? Right? We call it shlemazal, means say somebody who is not good at getting out the ends which he wants, right? I mean, shlemazal could also be somebody trying to do the correct thing, but generally speaking, somebody in general. He tries to do it, right? So, I think we're just making it more complicated than it has to be. So, basically is, a wicked person, what we call a wicked person, his desire and his practical reasoning, his practical way of getting it could be, are in line, right? But his desire is wrong. And he's perfectly aware of it, could be perfectly aware of it, right? So it's not dependent on it. However, what gets complicated over here is, if the person thinks he desires a correct thing, he wants to do what's correct, but he does not realize that his desire, what he thinks is correct, is really wrong. But he's also good at getting at it, at getting to that point, right? So now, complete practical truth, that is practical goodness, according to Aristotle, is that he has a true concrete judgment of what the correct thing to do is, what is a correct thing, and he has a concrete desire and choice for the correct thing. He is perfectly aligned and integrated. That is the ethical human being for Aristotle. Now, the clever person we just discussed, he's great at reasoning correctly. He's very good at that, right? But his desire, and so it means desire, so the point of it is that his desire and reasoning are integrated. Desire is not in conflict with his reasoning. They're just off to the wrong point, right? That is quite simple. We know he's wrong, right? That's not a hard case. And that's obviously not the case here in the Bezdin. The Bezdin here is not purposely trying to do the wrong thing, right? The hard case is, he has the right ultimate end. He's aiming for, his desire is to do the correct thing. But his practical judgment may be wrong. What he took to be the salient features, what he took to be the right thing, could be wrong. So his desire is not aligned. His desire with the practical judgment are not aligned. So his desire is correct, his practical judgment is off, right? We have a different one, which is acrasis, which is basically the English translation is acrasis. It's continent. Basically, is that's a moishel benafshe, as the Rambam seems to call it. I tell you out, the Rambam is not 100% Aristotelian with this. I'm not getting into it. I mean, we are hopefully going to get to it eventually, but right now that's not the point. But it's Kant. I mean, we call it basically moishel benafshe. That is, he knows his desire might be the correct concept, his practical judgment, he knows what to do it, yet there's a split, it's not integrated, rather, it's not integrated together, because his desire is, not his desire, in other words, after his desire is off, his judgment is correct, but he knows what is correct, right? So the person that's wicked, his desire and his judgment is correct, are hand in hand, they go to work together, and that's why he does the wrong thing. Somebody who's a krasis, somebody that is continent, somebody that is moishe b'nafshay, or has to be moishe b'nafshay, let's put it that way. Here, what he'll be doing something wrong. He has desire is for the wrong thing, but he knows what the right thing over here is, and he simply sometimes cannot be moishe b'nafshay and say he does the wrong thing. That's also not the case over here, right? Because here the Bezdin is not pshat. It's saying is we know that we really know the correct thing over here is we just have a hard time because we want honor, we want the COVID, because we're going to go with Besmedish now, and people are going to maybe we'll get a plaque for it because I don't know, we're passing into kach, whatever it is, right? We're going to get a favor down the road. That is not what we're discussing. We're discussing basically is somebody who's desired to do the correct thing, but his practical judgment seems to have went off in this case, right? So the question over here is that possible for a Phronimos to do? Again, Aristotle does not make these distinctions between. For him, it basically is you have the correct desire with the correct practical judgment. That is the ethical human being. Somebody that has the wrong desire, right? His desire is completely off, and his practical judgment is good. That is a person that is wicked, right? But here, ultimately, the hard case over here is somebody that has the correct desire, but his practical judgment is off. Now, the question over here is, right, is he in the right truth, right? Is he doing the right? The question then we really have to ask before we discuss everything is, what exactly does it mean for something to be true? Now, see, truth in Aristotle's corpus is just, again, even ethical truth just means goodness, right? Truth means it aligns with reality. That's technically what it means. However, we have to really take it apart because, well, to be obvious when we finish this part. Now, there are 5 levels of 5 things we need to keep in mind when discussing, when asking somebody if something is true. The first thing is the truth bearer. That is the claim, the sentence, right? I make a claim that this cat is lying on the ground. That is the truth bearer. The sentence, the words, this cat is lying on the ground is the truth bearer. The truth ground, or one that grounds the truth, would be that there is a cat which is objectively outside, right? That corresponds to what I'm talking about. If nothing corresponds to what I'm saying, it's not correspondence theory of truth, but ultimately these are things that must all be taken into account when discussing truth, right? There's different, truth corresponding, a basic truth corresponds to the thing we say. When I say something, it's really how it is outside of me. That's not necessarily, Aristotle not to be a basic truth corresponding, and in general, even if you're not a truth correspondence theory of truth, there still has to be something which aligns to when I'm speaking, otherwise I'm speaking about nothing, speaking about nonsense, right? Has to be something which is true, right? So in a concrete object, there is a cat which is what I'm referring to. Right? Then there's ontological structure, which what makes the world itself, what makes these things objectively understandable and not just chaos, not just noise. In other words, there has to be some ordering which I have in the world, objectively or subjectively. In other words, my mind is the one which is making it coherent and ordered, and therefore we can have something which corresponds to it, right? So that is the ontological structure of the world. And then is the mode of access, right? So that is basically before we even speak about the agent, the person, the one, right? We have the articulation, the sentence, we have the thing that corresponds to it, then we have the world as such. Now we have the question is, the human being as such, how does he have access to this truth, right? And then the conceptual articulation is what makes, is the bridge from the ontological structure of the world, right? To the truth bearer. In other words, we have the truth bearer, the sentence. We have the truth ground, what grounds the truth, what makes it the cat, which is actually over there. There is a logical structure that the concept of that there's a concept of the world not just cat, right? I didn't want to speak in Kant, Dafkanish. I didn't want to bring in Kant, but you want to call that way, the pure forms of intuition and that. Right. For basic, for sake of argument, we could use that. If you want, that basically makes it that the world is coherent and intelligible as such. And then we have the question is, how do I, as a human being, have access to it at all, right? Which, if you want to use a Kantian analogy, will be the thing in of itself, I have no access to, and therefore, I actually cannot be speaking about the thing in itself, which is beyond the pure forms of intuition and the categories which order what I see. Then we have, that's precisely the question, again, this is a loose analogy to Kant, obviously, just already brought up and we use it as an example. The question is the ontological structure, thing as such, what gives it the relation to the truth bearer, to the sentences. That is the third question, conceptual articulation. In other words, for Kant, there is absolutely the ontological structure, meaning the beyond the ontological structure, right? So it's precisely it. In other words, the ontological, according to Kant, right? I need to have the pure forms of intuition, space and time, which is giving me access to what I see. Therefore, the bridge is precisely would be the 12 categories and the pure forms of intuition are giving me that I can actually say something about the world outside of me. Therefore, that is the bridge between the ontological structure and between the truth bearer. However, precisely because there's no bridge between the thing in itself, I cannot say anything about it. All right, now, that is the 5 points you need to keep in mind when discussing truth. The question is, what does Aristotle believe truth is? Now, I was going to read it inside, but it's going to be too long. I'm going to say the basic where it is, and you have time looking after, look it up. It's quite a few books in the metaphysics. Now, the metaphysics book 4, which is gamma. The reason why it's gamma, not delta, is because metaphysics, the book 1 is alpha, the other one is alpha, the small alpha, I forgot the term for it, and then you have beta, and then you have gamma. So the 4th book of metaphysics, Aristotle starts off that we're going to discuss being qua being, right? The discussion right now is the essence wasn't when we say the being is something is, what exactly does that mean? Now, he says there are many senses of being. Here, right? He says there are many things when we say what a thing means. So a thing is what a thing, right? But all being goes back to the thing what we call essence. I call them hus if you want, but Most can mean different things, but that's the essence of a thing. Right? So there are many ways we could say something is. However, they're all really referring to being qua being, right? Now, the question over here is, when I speak and I'm saying something, then on what ground, what ground of being, I mean, how do I speak about being? What is the basic, the most inherent, the minimum principle? Let's go to the principle of non-contradiction, right? What does the principle of non-contradiction mean? That means that something cannot be in the same sense at the same time in two different things in this meaning contradictory in one object, right? That is the basic form when I discuss anything, whenever I want to speak about anything. Now, because this is the axiom, this is the most basic concept, I cannot go prove it logically. Why? Because to prove it logically, I have to go to something prior to it, which I was saying this is the grounds and I can't do it, right? So therefore, as looked at Aristotle, I can defend it from first principle because this itself is the first principle. And he said, if you can find a different first principle, then go right ahead and find it. But you're not going to find this first principle. So how could I? I'll define it through an argument, through argument. In other words, the minute, this is a synopsis, right? Let's say somebody goes, if you disagree with me, then you must either say something. You have to say something to disagree with me, right? If you're saying nothing, then obviously there's nothing to discuss because you're not saying anything. So by definition, you must mean something when you're saying it. Even if you're saying that something is not, you still must be saying something, otherwise you're simply saying nothing. And no different than a vegetable which can't say anything. Right? That's his term. Now, therefore, truth by definition is dependent on a person articulating something. So just taken as such, it seems almost like Aristotle is saying truth is simply what I articulate, which would mean that it's simply whatever I make up. However, Aristotle takes a great pains there and says that's not what it means. We're not a Pythagorean, we're not an Heraclitus, okay, whatever it is. So then what is it? The articulation of truth could be through grammar, but grammar is not what makes truth as truth. That is what we take out from things. In other words, I need to articulate it, otherwise I have no access to truth, but my articulation is not what makes it true. This is what in book Gamma. Now, book Epsilon, the sixth book of metaphysics, he seems to say two different things. Let me read part of it inside. It's a small thing. It's 6.4. Which part should I read? He basically he wants to divide two aspects of the truth. So he's saying, as regards to coincidental being, things which I'm putting together, meaning they're not simple beings, which that's going to make the issue now. Which reason why I want to take it aside. Regards coincidental being, then let us put it aside. For as it may sufficiently determine it. Okay, as for being as being true and not being as being false, right? Now there's true and false. It depends on composition and division. When I say something is true and something is false, it depends on composition and division. What do I mean by that? And together I have to do the allocation of a contradictory pair. Right? For truth has affirmation in the case of what is put together and negation in the case of what is divided. Right? We'll skip. So, but for falsehood and truth are not in the things. Right? Here he seems to be saying that falsehood and truth are not something which is a characteristic, right? Color and accidents are things which inhere in a substance. But he seems to be saying that falsehood and truth are not dependent, not something which inhere inside an actual object. No, what then is it? As if the good were true and the bad false from the outset. But the true and false are but in thought. Well, because he says that. I'll tell you about Peck. Instead of reading aside, see, the reason why he's saying over here is because we're saying things which are composites. We're saying that if it is composite, when it's my sentence which is making it true or false, right? If it's composite, then it is true. If I say it's composite, and if I say it's not composite, I'm false. So it's not a truth. It does not adhere in the actual substance. It is my words which are true or false. Whereas he said things which are not composite, things which are in essence a substance, simple objects. There, it's not even possible. The category of true, well, it's not a category, but the thing true and false is not possible because there's no compositeness to say that I'm false, and it is I was false and it is a composite item, or I was right and it is not, and it is a composite option. It's either I understood it or I did not understand it. Think about it this way. In other words, when I have a horse, which is out over here, I can say that the horse is here, and the horse, or let's say the cat, right? We said the cat before. Remember, the cat is lying down. Now, the ground, right, is my sentence. The truth bearer, my sentence, the cat is lying down. Now, the ground would be if it is actually lying down, and it's false, so that's true, and it's false if it is not lying down. So we have the cat, and then we have my sentence, which is a composite, which is meaning it's a predicate, right? I'm saying a predicate on a noun, on an object. It is something doing such and such. So if it is doing such and such, it is true. If it's not doing such and such, it is false. However, if something which is not a predicate, something which is not a composite, something which is a pure substance with no addition.
Tree.
No, because even a tree is it's red, green, and red, the other leaves.
When I say the composite of it, the tree is red
So-
or green.
so what?
Tree itself, then there's nothing. There's no.
Right, and that's In other words, a substance. In other words, substance of tree. Yes. So the substance of tree is not false or true. I either comprehended it correctly, or I did not comprehend it.
So
Right?
you're saying only one word. You're saying the word tree. That's
Yeah. No, to me, say a substance. Right. A simple, which is a substance, is either comprehended it or did not comprehend it. But this will seem to be saying, Aristotle is saying, that true and false is not dependent on the dependent on the human being. In other words, I'm the one that is saying what's true and false. Now, obviously here, what he means to say is, again, it's not that I am the one making it true or false. My language, my object corresponds to something external to myself, and therefore is either right or wrong, but not that I'm not Humpty Dumpty, who is making true and false by fiat according to what I want it to be, right? Even that. So that is really where book Zeta comes in. That's book 7, the next book, which there, I don't want to get into, again, I mean, that's literally almost the whole book. You want to read the last one, 7:17. But the point over here is that the question here is, then because I need to have, in other words, the problem here is like this. You're saying is that the human being is not the one, is not the standard bearer of truth. Truth is external, meaning the thing that I'm speaking about is external to me and that is existent outside of me. It is a judgment which I am making of something which makes it true or false. So what is this something that I'm making the judgment about? What is what am I, in other words, what's external to me, which I am discussing and can tell me the ground, the truth ground, right? That's grounding my sentence is it true or false. That is substance. That is, right? So a substance then, and the accents on the substance, these are the stuff where I'm discussing. So again, it's not that the person is making a correct, is the arbitrator of true and false. The true and false, the person through language, I can comprehend the external reality outside of myself, and therefore I could be either true or false with a composite theoretical reasoning, but it is not myself, it's not the person who is the grounds of true or false. True or false is external to this being, right? In other words, again, being, in other words, it has to be something, a being, which is outside of me. If true and false is not inherent in the thing itself, it is rather the person's judgment, I need to be making a judgment on something. What is this something which I'm making the judgment on? That is a book, Zeta is telling me I'm making that judgment on substance, on essence, on being. And if it corresponds correctly to it, that is true. And if it does not correspond correctly to it, that is false. With a composite thing, in other words, accents on the substance, there it is correct or false. It's something which is simple. I either comprehended it correctly or did not comprehend it correctly. However, the problem over here, so in other words, it's formal realism. Right? The realism is something which is really outside of me, but it takes on, it's the form, right? Because remember, I skipped the whole thing of the famous hylomorphism, right? What is the thing? So in other words, you have matter and you have form. Right? It basically is Matter cannot be the ground of truth, because matter in itself is not a this. It is not something which cannot point to it. It's not something which is different than anything else. Prime matter. Now, prime matter itself is a whole machlokes going back from the medieval ages, really, even before that. The Greek commentators itself, if Aristotle held there's a concept of prime matter which is beyond matter itself, it has to do about how one thing changes into the being and becoming. We're not getting into that, right? But the end of it here is the question here is not the becoming, the question is the being, right? So matter itself cannot be what being is, because matter itself does not exist by itself and has no distinction, and therefore I cannot make any single, I cannot make truth statements on matter. So what is it? That is essence, that is form. And that is what gives it the essence. It is what it is. And therefore, I could correspond to what it is because the form is what actually gives it matter. So when I speak about a horse doing such and such, the form, right, which is a horse, I can therefore be either right or wrong, right? So that is the substance. The form is real, it's a formal realism, and therefore I am right or wrong according to how much my statement corresponds to something which is external and existent outside of me, right? So now, see if I can read this inside. Here's the famous, it's actually quite famous because it makes a lot of problems. It's a very controversial how we read it. But the ninth book, the 10th chapter, he then goes and said, now that we discuss, and now that all the beginning of book 4, he was simply discussing the concept that truth is not arbitrary. Truth is not something that I decided to be. Truth has to come with the basic principle, basic axiom of principle of non-contradiction. Otherwise, I say nothing. Does not mean that I am the one that is making something true or false, because if yes, it's completely meaningless, right? If I'm the one, basically, if I'm doing Humpty Dumpty, then it's completely meaningless. Now, then the question over here is, right, then the question over there was that we have two forms of truth, the composite and the simple. And the question over here is, what is the bearer of these truth? As we have the concept of substance, form. The form is the bearer of these truths. Now let's bring it back to these two forms of the simple and the simple and the composite. What makes it true and false? Of how exactly do we comprehend then the truth, the form, right? Because now what I'm comprehending is the form, right? Now, how do I comprehend the form of the composites and of the simple? So we're going to go like this. I'm going to read this inside. Since something is said to be or not to be, in some cases reference to the figures or predication, and others reference to the potentiality or activity, or these, whatever, and in others by being in the strictest sense true or false. And since this, in the case of the things, is being combined or being divided, so that a person grasps what is true when he thinks what is divided to be divided, right? So he grasps what is true when the form is divided, or what is combined to be combined, while he grasps what is false when his state is contrary to that of the things. When is there and when is there not what we call true or false? For, then here's this part is easy to follow. For what we mean by this must be investigated. For it is not because we truly think you to be pale that you are pale, rather, but because it is your thought, your being pale, that we who say this grasp what is true. Right? It's not because I say now that this person is pale, and therefore it's, in other words, it's a form which is, the point of it here is, it's not that it's a form floating around in the world, and once I label it, it becomes true, it becomes what I label it to be. Rather, Aristotle's theory of language is that it is that a correct form, a truth is when I correctly label the form what it is. So yes, and before I speak about it, it doesn't have the word pale, but it is pale in truth, in real, because it is what it is in of itself. It's a substance. It is what it is. My correctness, my form, and I'm true when I correctly label it is. It's not pale because I decided it's pale. What? We'll get to Wittgenstein in a minute. And that is where, Whereas my labeling it false, where if I label it, I can play lots of flow. It is not because they truly think you to be pale that you are pale, but it is because of your being pale that we who say this grasp that it is true, right? So, as regards to the incomposite things, that is not the proper matter, the pure substance, the form, the essence, the pure substance. As regards the incomposite things, then, right? Because over here, the problem over here is it's not even articulatable in language per se, right? So now, I'm saying it's a tree, as you said. I'm not really adding anything. So what exactly is that? Regards to the composite things, then. So how's it possible to be false, true or false? So in that case, it's not possible to be false. It's only you didn't comprehend it at all, because it's either you comprehended it or didn't comprehend it. But that means this comprehension is different than the comprehension of pale and false. Because you said pale and false, I'm comprehending a person correctly. An accident, I comprehended wrong. I'm comprehending the cat is over here. I understand I'm speaking the cat correctly. My falseness is that doesn't correspond to the fact that it's standing and not lying down. But when it comes to an incomposite thing, my comprehension, my correct and false is not the same way. So how's my comprehension? So I understand what could be wrong. If I'm wrong, I just don't comprehend it. So if I'm right, then what am I comprehending? Because I'm not speaking about something that is doing something. As regards to the composite things, then, what is being or not being, and what is truth and falsehood? For they're not composite, right? For they're not composite, so that they would be if combined and if not be if divided, right? Being in the truth and false, like the pale and the log, or the incommensurable and the diagonal. Nor will truth and falsehood still hold in the same way in their case. Or rather, just as truth is not the same in their case, neither is being. Instead, truth or falsity consists in this: to touch and to phrase are true, for an affirmation and a phrase are not the same, but to be ignorant is not to touch. So if I touch it, a noetic touch, noetic has to do with the mind, meaning I comprehend it in my mind, a noetic, that means I touched it correctly per se, because that's true. And if I didn't, then now, Aristotle does not, this is an important point. It's easy to read from here. Aristotle is trying to say like a mysticism. If I comprehend, I can't speak about it, but I comprehended it like it's on a mystical union with it. That's I apprehend the truth. And if I did not comprehend, if I didn't touch it, I said that's not what he means. It means it is still a language, and it's still an external object which exists outside of a thing. The point I'm trying to make out here is precisely it's not practical reasoning. In other words, if we want to read Aristotle, that it's simply I touch it, like it's a mystical touching, and then I say that is exactly what practical reasoning for Aristotle is also. I have a practical, I don't know what the correct thing over here is, so you stop for a minute, you think it through, and then you actually there's a practical reasoning which is correct floating around in the world, right? And therefore, I sort of touch it. The phronimos could noetically touch it, have a mystical union with it, and therefore knows what is true. However, Aristotle clearly does not mean that, right? There's no way of not comprehending anything without language. Language ultimately is what gives understanding to the human, to the person. However, there is a formal realism. Substance actually exists outside of the person, but it does not mean that there's a something which I cannot speak about. The difference over here is that precisely because it's not composite, it's not a cat, which I'm then making the state of the cat is true or false. I'm speaking about a substance of something that is, of being as such, true being. And if I understand what the substance, what it means to be a tree, then I understand, then I have a actual understanding of the substance of a tree. If I do not, then I completely misunderstood. Does not mean that there's an internal feeling of tree which I cannot explain or teach. But it's a different form of understanding because, and therefore the correct and the falseness is different. Now the problem, so now for instance, let's give it like a Mushavik Kant, who strongly disagrees with meaning. Again, I'm not trying to get into the whole thing of Kant, but I just want to begin at a certain point, understand what Aristotle is saying. And for instance, Kant argues on this formal realism project. Right? For Aristotle, the point of view here is there's an actual thing existing outside of me. And that is what being is, and that is in truth what I'm working to comprehend. If I comprehend it correctly, then it's true. If I comprehend it falsely, it is false. If I understand what it's competent, what it's doing, that is true. If I do not, that is false, right? But what I'm doing over here is the actual truth, the actual being, the actual substance. That's what I'm discussing. For Kant, precisely that is the part which is impossible. At the most I could do is through the pure category, the pure forms of intuition, the pure categories, right? The transcendental thinking. Now again, for Kant itself is also I am dealing with concrete objects in the world. However, Kant is saying to Aristotle, you're not having a form or real, you're not getting the substance in of itself. The most you can have is how the substance is given to you according to your forms of intuition, according to the categories, your transcendental categories. Yes, right. So in other words, so what Aristotle collapses into one, for Kant, it's impossible because I have no way of accessing the pure substance, the pure, only how it's given in my pure form of intuition and the transcendental categories. Now, we're not going to get the whole thing. We're not right, wrong. It's not relevant. What is in the guy over here is how does this play? How does this work with our Bezdin case? Right? Because according to this thing of true and false, the question, it will seem that if they comprehend correctly what is the truth, what the true case is, then that is truth, and they don't. The problem over here is we're not talking about the substance, or we're not talking about a thing, right? Money may be a thing, Besmedish is a thing, but practical judgment, practical thing is not a substance which I'm dealing with, right? So what exactly does it mean to have a true judgment, a true, right? In other words, if truth has to do with how it corresponds to how it is in truth, right? How it is externally, a formal realism, I don't have that by.
I understand what you're saying, but in a certain, but there is a truth. What brings a person to flourish? There is an act that's going to bring a person to flourish. What's true in this case is going to correspond to that which brings a person to flourish.
Yeah, but flourishing is not a substance. Flourishing is not something. If truth has to correspond, right? How would you explain it? It is obviously this true and false, right? But practical truth cannot be exactly the same as talking about actual propositional truth. Because there's not, propositional truth is how do I successfully understand the substance or the not the categories, the accents, the composites of the substance, right? I don't have this by practical reasoning because what makes the tzedukah the correct tzedukah to give, the correct concept, correct is not a substance, right? Pain is not a substance. Feelings are not substances. So when we discuss...
True and false about is about substances?
Well, no, obviously not. So how do we understand that, right?
Okay, all right.
Right. So that is where I want to bring in Wittgenstein. Now, just to sharpen it and to make it coherently. I think there's a different thing that Wittgenstein could, but that's, well, no, make it whatever it is, but that's later. In others, right now we're going to use them to help Aristotle, or just to make it easier to understand, in order to understand, right? So, we discussed pain. This is...
Things where he changed philosophy.
Apparently, again, he doesn't use this either. This is, I'm just putting it together. He doesn't advocate everything, but almost never discusses anything. The problem is, so again, I'm just putting it together, right? The question over here is, I want to try and bring over here is, you don't need, for practical reasoning, that there should be a form of the correct thing. Because in other words, it sounds, in the way, according to, if we take our side like this, it sounds almost like he's espousing some form of, it seems like basically it sounds like we have two horns. Either we say a Platonic form of realism, there's a true din which is existing in the world, and can you comprehend that actual din? So there's a billion different things according to each different things, which obviously just sounds, sounds ridiculous, and Aristotle himself obviously never agreed to that because this concept, whatever, is non-existent. But then again, or we say that in truth there is no within real truth. The truth is completely what you decide in what it is. We have to sort of find a way of ground that truth is independent of the human being as such, yet it is the human being is the one that gives it its form, and there could be right and wrong, right? So that is where I think the discussion we discussed about pain in Wittgenstein, it came in. Now, there's a misunderstanding in truth. Now, this is how I understand it. People I think it's a misunderstanding what certain people understand it, but this is, again, we're learning it the way I understand it, because that's the way I understand it, right? And we're going to get into, eventually we have to get more into it anyways, but that's, maybe we get more back to HaChassidus, but right now we're just all trying to understand mistakes. Either way, so pain, right? The word, remember the private language argument, we'll think about 7 or 7, 8, 9, whatever it is, right? Now, the point here is, I'm going to give a compressed version of it, and eventually when we get to it more, we'll expound the proofs and we'll sound more logic. The point of it here is pain as such is existent prior, so we're not going to use pain because pain is the word, right? It's a sensation of suffering, right? Let's say suffering, right? Suffering, which is person where the child suffers, exists outside of language. It's a feeling, and it's true in the sense that there is an actual feeling of suffering. Pain, as articulated, and the grammatical meaning of pain is only through the structure of language and grammar and the social condition, not conditioning, the social structure, I had a better word for it, I forgot what it was, of the child, right? So in other words, there is, and the point of it is that the word pain can only do so much. In other words, if there is no feeling at all, then pain itself is meaningless also. Think about the label of pain, which is to the private, it's a description of something which exists and therefore shapes that description. It shapes that feeling. But you can't have one without the other. You can have suffering without pain, the other word pain, and therefore it does not have the connotations of pain and how we socially understand it to mean, right? So in other words, think of the first person, the feeling pain, right? So he could feel this feeling, and that would be private language. However, what he cannot do, he cannot say the next time I felt the same thing again without having the language of pain. He can have an actual, but pain does not invent the actual feeling. But pain is what gives it the actual name, and therefore it can actually be labeled and next time be pointed to also. What it also does then over here is it allows the third person, external, meaning the third person, the one as the first person, second person, third person, right? The third person, an outside viewer, to understand and try and think. Now the third person could be wrong by saying that he is feeling that Pliny is feeling pain. The first person cannot be wrong in the sense of what he is feeling, because it's a reflexive labeling that when he's feeling something, he is feeling pain, right? It's reflexive, but it is true, right? So we have something which is constrained, another something which is true outside of grammar and action and language, but language is what constrains it. And as the word constraint can be sort of wrong, I don't mean constrain as a little, but language is what gives it its meaning in the social context, and therefore it gives us parameters, and therefore it takes a whole new meaning, right? So this, when we talk about practical reasoning, we're speaking about things which are similar to this. We're not talking about a Platonic din, which is of truth, which belongs itself just to the right thing to do as such. It is not talking about something which is completely arbitrary, so definitely it's not arbitrary, right? So rather, what is it? That the case is real, all the facts is real, the suffering is real, the money, everything is real, right? The question is the features and what we put and what gives it its meaning, that is dependent on the phronesis, on the phronimos, executing phronesis to then give it its solid form. So in other words, this is basically the distinction we've been making the whole time. There's no such thing as tzedukah as such. We know we have the word tzedukah, and we know what tzedukah means, independent of the again, the problem with Wittgenstein exactly because it is the grammar dependent on the social thing, but whatever, you get what I'm trying to say. Independent of the person. We have that tzedukah, we have biseknesis, we have the question is, now that is a concrete fact. The question is now, do we say that the person is, the phronimos is is executing phronesis, is he concretizing these things correctly or not? And that is why it's possible to be true or to be false. So the point over here is the person is not the one which is making truth and making false. It is true, independent of his thing, but he has to. But ultimately, it is not. It's not a substance which exists without him. Tzedukah as such does not exist without a person deciding that this case now equals as tzedukah. You can have the parameters, the laws, the language existing outside, being true without him. However, that doesn't tell me these practical cases if it goes into it.
So that helps us understand this theory with the leader.
No, now let's go back to truth bearer, right? So, in our case of the Bezdin, so the truth bearer, right, in general, right, let me say is that the language, the statement, right, which is for Aristotle, is what is a truth bearer for Aristotle, right, is the thought, the assertion, and in that case, by ethics, is the practical judgment, right? It's the saying, the statement is what it is. When it comes to the halacha, the Bezdin, what is it? The psak din, and the reason, right? That is the truth bearer. Now, what is the thing, right? What is the truth ground? In other words, what is the thing that is external thing to it, right? So that is the reality, the practical situation, as Aristotle, and according to and the halacha thing is again, is the Torah reason and the actual circumstances, which is the tzedukah by Phronesis and the thing, right? So the question over here is, do these things correspond? What makes it the world ordered as such? Well, that is for Aristotle is the substance and form. That's what makes these are the ground. That makes it the things intelligible that I can speak about it to begin with, right? And when it comes to the halacha aspects, it is the needs, illness, all these things. That's why I can discuss now this case, because these are the stuff which the forms, the category I'm going to be trying to organize now, right? These are the facts that I have, and now I'm trying to organize that, right? Now, how do I as a person have access to these categories, these statements, these ontological aspects, right? So either perception, right, through logos, which is language, or phronesis. That is how I have access, and that's what I'm executing my judgment. And according to Bezdin, the same thing, through learning, deliberation, and the psak din. Right now, the conceptual articulation, the bridge between the ontological aspects with the truth bearer is what it says, according to this, we were born on Wittgenstein. That will be the grammar and the criteria, the practice and correction. That is what bridges the fact, the substance form, or the facts of the case is illness. That's what brings it now that I have the ability to make a judgment and try to form it into a coherent whole. Now that we have this thing, that now we have the question stronger, really, because then we have now a Bezdin who is executing phronesis, right? And the truth is not my simple arbitrary by fiat, because I said this at psak din. There is an external truth, not a floating Platonic form, but there's something ultimately which I'm constrained to, and it's possible for me to be wrong objectively so. Right? So now, and the same thing when it comes to ethics, there is an ethical truth, and the question is, as a phronimos, do I exercise my phronesis correctly or not? Right? Give me a second. Well, yeah, I just wanted to bring out strong when you're saying truth, right? Right. So now we have well, basically, I wrote this down. I typed it up, whatever it is. that the conative integration and conative correctness and cognitive correctness are analytically distinct. Right, Aristotle's complete virtue claims to unite right desire, right? That's the thing he wants the right thing with true practical judgment, and integrated choice. However, the hard case, which is what we're discussing now, the Bezdin, holds the ultimate end. It holds the ultimate end. I want to do the correct thing, and the conative integration fixed while allowing a false concrete specifications of what the end requires here. Okay. So now that's. The first order practical truth is basically this a little bit right before I came. That's the reason why I have separate things. And the first order practical truth is which actions of ruling is true, right? The first thing. The second is how does the agent of the court know who possesses the capacity. The conative integration means if desire and choice, if it accords with the agent's judgment correctly. I judge so and so, but do I want to do the correct thing, and do I have continence, and the conative correctness is desired and generally right. And then I have the problem that does all these things automatically mean that I have a cognitive correctness, that it is actually correct, or can I do the wrong thing? So the question is it even possible that we can actually even hit the correct thing? In other words, just because that I say something is normatively so, this should be right normative and all that should be the rule, the one that not the judging case, the one that controls the controlling action, is that it should always be a virtuous response, and the definition of virtuous response is that it's a correct thing. Does not mean that in practical human terms it's possible to have. Right? This is the question if it's possible, and that leads to the two fallible and infallible horns. Aristotle in 2:9, I'm not going to read it now, we look it up there. It's actually the guy more for the Rambam, but okay. But in the Nicomachean Ethics 2:9, basically he says that it is extremely hard to get it, and he's referring to not only for teaching, even for the person himself, which he says that at times many times you should be aiming. Let me should read the ending at least. It's literally only a word. That he said that you should even aim for not for the mean, not for the middle. You should aim slightly to the one which is the other end, which is a little better, because hopefully through that, as I said after the Rambam, it seems on the face of it the Rambam is saying this, which would then mean that the Rambam is saying, let's say till we get to there, because it's saying that the biggest thing which really irks me is that take Aristotle, take Nicomachean Ethics, and I'm going to take the Torah and see what I can put in the Torah in it. In other words, at the Rambam, Aristotle is such a big thing. That means all I have to do is I can read Aristotle, and then whatever thing, I put the Rambam inside it. And the problem is also, you don't take the Aristotle, you don't break down every single argument, right? And and then see what actually holds, what was muchach, and then you see also when it took one thing doesn't mean the next thing necessarily follows. Right? You read it like a fool, just accept everything that he says and think, Kant, so Moshe B'nafshoy and the Chassid means the same thing. You read Aristotle, read the Rambam, read it's impossible that mean the same thing, and then try to understand why it can be the same thing. If you come and give it Anucha, it means the same thing. You read it uncritically, I get nowhere. So it sounds like it truly does. The Rambam always says that you always go all the thing. But that means so the mistake is the Rambam get passing that basically Aristotle is saying that it's impossible to reach that end. So therefore it's not possible to be a chassid either. But the Rambam is saying that's itself a chassid. The Rambam says a chassid is the one that does the thing, but according to Aristotle, that's not what a chassid is, right? By definition. It's not you.
No, it's someone on a simple reading.
I understand, but the Rambam says in Dais, you're referring to the one that dies, and says, okay, that is a chassid. But according to Aristotle, it's not a chassid. Let's read inside here. It's not a person who deviates a little, whether towards. Okay, now one paragraph before it. To sum up, then, if we do these things, we will be most able to hit the mean. But presumably, it's difficult to hit it. It's very hard to hit the mean, the golden mean, right? Most of all, in the realm of particulars. For it is not easy to define how, with whom, about what, or for how long a time one should be angry. For sometimes, indeed, we ourselves praise someone who are deficient in anger, saying that they are mild-mannered, and sometimes those who are harsh, calling them manly. Right? It is not the person who deviates a little, whether towards excess or toward deficiency, who is blamed. However, but one who does so a lot. For someone like that does not escape notice. But up to what point and to what extent one's deviation is blameworthy is not easy to define in an account, nor indeed is anything else among perceptibles. Such things lie in the particulars, and the discernment is perception. This much therefore makes clear that the mean state is praiseworthy in all cases, but that we shall sometimes incline towards excess and sometimes towards deficiency, for that way we will most easily hit the mean and do well. In other words, he seems to almost like saying to that. Masal Shiny is extremely difficult, maybe not, but he said if you go on, eventually you'll hit the mean and you'll do well. So what does he mean? Does he really mean that way? Not, yashludin, but don't just say take wholesale tasting. One thing is that it's not so simple and not necessarily muchich that you could actually hit it. However, what? Right, because we basically we have three ways of reading this thing. We either say that the mean has a range, it's not a particular one thing, right? It's not really mashman as words. He says, do as and therefore you will hit the mean. Because I mean, that itself, by doing that, you're hitting the mean, therefore that's fine. It's not so mashman. Right, but it's also a better chance. It says, therefore you will hit the mean. Meaning, that is the correct way of doing it. It's because in others, because I'm going to go, let's say this is the mean, right? And this, I'm going to go which way to go, but sometimes you go more to this way, something more to this way. Why? So if you're always, the T is always pulling you to this way, if you go slightly this way, you're going to be pulled to the mean. And you go this way, then you'll be too much this way. Right. So you're going to hit the mean that way, right? Or it means that the exact or permissible answer is completely independently fixed on the person, right? But the phronemos is the one that is the best finite individual that has a chance of hitting it, or that the phronemos himself is the one that makes it that this is the correct thing. Now, these two things, but I'm trying to say that what it's completely arbitrary. No, it's definitely not arbitrary. The question, we still don't know really if especially if we put in the Wittgenstein reading, it's not so clear exactly what the truth is. But that's going to be for next week, so we're not leaving that. We're going to leave that here for now. But
last week you said that the infallible position means that Aristotle holds that if you do Phronesis and your Phronemos, then ultimately you have to do the right thing. Now you're saying that what Aristotle is saying is that it's almost like hit and miss, and it's not ultimately that you have to hit the mean, right? Because you're going to go a little bit.
Yeah, but think over here in 2.9, he's not speaking about a phronemos. He's saying why we need phronemos. He's saying a person, you're working out towards. The question over here is, if phronemos, does he always hit it or not? That's sort of the question, right?
Right. He's not.
No, he's talking about in general.
How to get there.
But you could read it again. You could read them. The problem again, these are not clear, these texts. I mean, I think I actually pose and then go read it through and you tell me what you think. But the end of it here is, Lamase, one thing is very difficult, and we could read it two ways. That is infallible. That means to say is that phronemos will always hit the correct thing, and therefore, if he made a mistake, what does that mean? That he's not a phronemos, which means it's self-certifying that is thing, which also means the whole thing is sort of meaningless, because as far as I, a bezin, am passing so and so, or I'm watching a bezin pass so and so, that means I know one of them is by definition not from one thing, but I have no way of telling, because they both could all exhibit the basic thing, right?
The person saying that they have to have the Rebbe, how much they're going to have. If it didn't happen, then I would
Yeah, the shala, the way over here is, betochen, you have to choose ultimately which one you're choosing, because I've never met anybody that holds every single Rebbe, right? There's always, I don't want to get too much into politics, and the idea is, you're still choosing who your Rebbe is. So why are you choosing that Rebbe? I'm on Tate. Oh, okay, now that, so before the Rebbe was so it means to say, ultimately, how far are you going to go back? To the Baal Shem Tov? Fine, but then you had the Baal Shem Tov, then, it was Mechadish. If it wasn't Mechadish anything, then what was the whole argument? They misunderstood it? All right, even if they misunderstood it, then who said, meaning you're still choosing who understood it, who didn't understand. Ultimately, it has to stop somewhere. But whatever it is, yeah, let's get into politics. So, again, right? So the infallible thing, which means that somebody did make a mistake, well, that means say he was obviously not a phronemos. And we have the two bezins who each one believes all this completely wrong in incompatible cases. And we're saying is that each are trying to do the correct thing, and they each are what we believe to be phronemos. Well, I have no idea. Ultimately, me as an external, as an outsider, I have no idea who and who I should choose, right? So even though the infallibilist, the ideal, it gives me the true condition and the truth condition, practically, it's very, very hard to see how it is a practical thing, right? Now, the Fallibilist Horn then would be that you have, even if you're a genuine, you can have the phronemos. You are a phronemos. You can still be wrong. Here's something else I wanted to add, which is very good. Second, page 5. Okay, so if you write an infallibilist thing, that's which then it just makes it more difficult even for the person themselves. The question is, right, phenomenologically, how do they experience their thing? There's no reason to believe that they experience stuff that they don't know. Right? They each, if they feel they don't know, that person's saying, and on the business that they do that they're correct, then they can't say you're wrong, unless they know for sure that they are wrong, and then you don't know if you're right. Okay, that's also possible. But in the case where it's Let's say a case which is not like that, right? A case where I think they're right, I mean, the Bezdin thinks that they're right, and they're wrong. And therefore, if you say they can still make a mistake, even if they have great practical judgment, well, in that case, we have the problem of meaning again that not only through the second person, even the first order has an issue, right? Right. Now the problem over here is that let's go a step back. Desire, right? We spoke about desire. Desire is what the person desires, what he wants the end to be, right? And then the practical judgment is how he achieves it, how he gets to it, right? Now, so we mentioned, I think, last week that Aristotle says you can't really teach ethics to somebody who is completely off. Why? Because they're completely off. Oh, got late. Okay, so I'm not giving anything aside, but basically they'll take me at the word. If you want, I can give the man later. I think I gave it last week also. It doesn't make a difference. And the end of it here is that basically is that the formation, the ethical Hoti, or Hoti, I'm going to pronounce it, that basically the formation of the child, and you can only really teach ethics to somebody who is brought up correctly. Why? Because otherwise his desire is completely off. And he doesn't necessarily, and it's not that he knows that he is wrong, right? A clever person, right, was saying he knows what he's doing, people not consider ethical, and he knows he's doing wrong. He does it anyways, he's great at doing it, right? Discussion over here is, with the problem over here is, many times, because let's put it this way, we're not going, it's not Wittgenstein is a different level, but even Aristotle saying, people that, because Aristotle basically explained, right, that the upbringing, meaning culture and these things, tells you what should be counted as important today's days, right? In other words, what we consider ethical in that sense. Aristotle is definitely not an ethicist in the sense ethical meaning with the time, as opposed to it's completely it's arbitrary whatever the oilum decides. Absolutely not. Aristotle holds it's objective, human flourishing, human good, whatever. However, certain things do have what is considered important, not important, and those things are ultimately dependent on culture and certain things. Again, there's an objective, ultimately this is within the range, but what do you say now? But there's a step further than that also, right? The point of it here is also that there is the actual formation of the individual, what he considers to be important, is also dependent on it. Meaning in the same culture itself, it's dependent each of the person, each individual, according to how he is brought up, how he understands things. Ultimately, it depends.
It's in the same culture.
No, well, yes and no. That's precisely the point. In other words, it could very well be that the Bezdin, because they're brought up in a different way. You can say the reason why there's machlokes is because they were brought up. What is considered the rabbis are very sensitive to poverty, and therefore he considered this is considered poverty. A person who's not so sensitive, was not brought up to so sensitive to poverty, and therefore not necessarily this doesn't go into the gate from poverty. Other person, let's say, was brought up with a disabled family member who couldn't go to shul or couldn't do everything because it didn't have a rest. For him, that means he is a besmedish, which does not have accessibility for disabled people. And therefore, it goes in the Yesh Mishoim, the Baskesis more, because it goes on the definition of that it makes it always besmedish if you don't have accessibility for everybody, right? So therefore, now that is possible, but that is, let's go in a case where they brought up the same community, same everything, and still have the same issue. In other words, right now, where the mistake happens, we have multiple different things, and let's just simply separate what we're discussing, what the hard case is, and why we don't really have. That's also in politics. I'm going to skip that for now. I want to go maybe a bit more about it at a different time. But the point of it here is what we have right now. We have the formation of the individual, right? So now the formation of the individual it forms the desire itself. Right? That's the point. Well, no, desire ultimately is formed also by ethical. Now, again, it could be changed, it could be things, especially if it's not vice, just in different nuances. But ultimately, the first part of it here is formation. The person as grows up. That is the formation of the ethics of desire. Right now, you have the formation of desire in general, what the person desires. So, in other words, the person that's how Aristotle says it. The person you brought up in a band of robbers, then your desire is completely. I don't even think it's necessarily wrong because that's how you're brought up. In other words, a person that went completely off the ethical path, he knows what he's doing is wrong. It's wrong. I'm doing it anyways. Whatever it is. I don't care. I'm doing it anyways. That is what his desire may have been, at least it may have been brought up correctly. He has the correct desire or not, but he's just allowing his his passion to get beyond it. His desire is wrong, even though he knows it's right. His desire is wrong, but he knows it's wrong. Whereas somebody that's brought up correctly, right, he still has a correct desire, right? So we have the formation, which is the ethical Hoti or Hoti, right? The end, which makes it that this is, that, and therefore I have.
But this is clear. The desire is, he just doesn't have the right desire because he was brought up wrong.
Right. No, I'm saying in general. No, we're saying in general. Practical truth, practical theory, practical reasoning, consistent. So we have the ethical formation of the person, which it tells them it sort of, which then makes it that this believes that this end is practically choice worthy, right? That's what he desires. That's what he's brought up, right? I mean, people are brought up that kuvud is important. That's what they always enjoy. The end there would be kuvud, right? That's a simple concept. Then you have the concrete specification that what would the end require here? In order to get to the end, what I need to get to there, right? That's practical reasoning. And then if reason and desire are unified in one choice, not in others, I have the wrong desire. I have desire. I know what I have to do to get that desire, meaning it's wrong, but I'm being forced into doing the correct thing, let's say. That would be less emotional nafshat type of concept. Or just the opposite. I know that it's wrong, but I can't think it, therefore right? So no, you have ethical formation, which you get the desire. Desire tells me that this is the end I want to get. Practical reasoning how to get that desire. If the two coincide, practical reason and desire into one unified choice, and that is correct, not necessarily true in the ethical sense, but it means that is correct practical reasoning. And then we have the action which brings it to right. So it's a practical syllogism, it's a practical act that brings me to go do it. Now, therefore, we can every single step over here we have it will mean a different form of an error, right? If the error is at the starting point is corrupt, right? That will be a malinformed, the ethical, which Aristotle says that we can't even discuss ethics with him because he's completely X, right? Because it could be 100%. In other words, this type of person is most dangerous because he reasons correctly. He has I want so and so. And this I brought up that this is the correct thing to do, even though it's completely ganz and krim. This is the correct thing to do. And therefore, how do I get to that end? And he does the act. And it's it's extremely difficult to re-inform, other through politics, I know, forcing him. That's sort of we're going to get much into it. That's, because ultimately, he is reasoning straight through and everything is in accord with his desire and the practical reasoning, right?
It's unified.
It's unified, but it's wrong because of his upbringing, right? So, in our terms, when we're using it, it's cognitive incorrectness with instrumental cognitive success. He is incorrect at the desire and the concept, meaning objectively, what we call objectively, but his instrumental and the cognitive, in other words, he managed to desire with the actual act, were successful together, right? So it obviously, according to Aristotle, cognitive correctness, we let me say, is it is ethically correct, but we're just borrowing the term, right? That will be one mistake. Error will be that the end is right, but he mistook the particular aspect. What is that? How to get to that? Right? He has a proper formation, right? And the end is correct, right? He desires the correct thing, and what the end should be. Practice was correct, and no vicious appetite, no vice, no anything. But being that he still has to determine what is the salient feature. What is the correct, how do we describe the situation? What goes on by smedish, what goes on by sknes, what goes on to davening, what goes on there tzedukah, what goes on there choli, etc., right? So he has the right formation, the right end. He has the false concrete specification because he had the wrong concept, and integrated choice, the practical reasoning came to that end, but the wrong action because he experienced the thing as fitting, right? So he has end-level cognitive correctness, but he has a particular case cognitive error, right? So the ultimate desire never changed. He wants what's right, and he wants what the Torah wants, but his choice in this particular act was wrong. So which, ironically enough, I mean that his desire then became wrong. His desire started off correct, but then the desire to do the wrong end.
The end was correct. He wants to help the person.
The initial desire was correct, but it ended up being wrong desire because the desire to do the action. Because desire was to do the action, right? That is.
I think a simple example of that is to help a person. You help a person by giving him money. You help the person by giving him rent. I want to help the person, and I gave the person money instead of, which was the wrong thing in this case, because the person was going to use it for drugs, and I didn't pay his rent. So the desire was to help the person, and he ultimately did try to help the person. But in the practical case of how to do that, he was wrong. So ultimately, his desire was wrong.
Right. And or the say the opposite thing would be if the Gemara says that when somebody gives at a few places, you have a comma. So you give not somebody, you give you give a person has 199 ziz, you give him one ziz, and they can't have pie anymore, right? So therefore, the act itself maybe is a good thing, but the desire, right? The same concept, right? So in other ones we have this set, we can understand where the person is reasoning wrong, just makes it simpler, and we can understand also why the answer is an answer for that, one answer for that, right? You're saying hey, the person the person that they were brought up wrong. All right, so that will be a mistake in the ethical upbringing, but we're not discussing that. We're just here the mistake is in the practical reasoning, right? Because the third possibility, which is what we're not. This is not our discussion. Which you have the desire is wrong. He wants to do a wrong desire. His practical thing is correct, right? In other words, he's being. No. I mean, say his desire, meaning he knows what's right and wrong. His practical judgment, whatever. Okay, basically is crazy. He's doing the wrong thing. Okay, whatever. I think we got to the point you're trying to make. Right. So now the best number here is the easy explanation will be that he's making a mistake in what and push it in reasoning. In the either his desire is wrong, right? They're saying no, everything is. The problem over here is in his actual ultimate theoretical, practical reasoning. He missed the salient points, whatever it is, and is that possible or not possible, right? So now, what this leaves us with, again, I'm not going to get to the politics, the political, and the thing is because it's still ultimately we don't have time for it. But the question here is that no, that's the law. That's maybe next July 4th at this point.
Yeah, politics is part of education.
Politics
is education.
Right. The question over here is then we can simply say that house. But if that means that's how I know if it's wrong or true. Meaning it's the second order answer, and even the second thing. If politics, then just tell me what it is, right? Meaning is wrong information. However, and the point over here is that makes a bezin is not like three individual people. There are people in a political entity in it, right, through the community, whatever it is, we could say would deem correct, whatever, which is the one that gives it, right? However, that tells me how practical knowledge is transmitted. It doesn't mean that the transmitted thing is true. In other words, Aristotle uses. I'm going to get into it now because, I mean, it's already getting late. You want to do a thing again? It's end of the day here is so. Right now we have truth is an objective truth. It's objective out of the. I mean, the person is not the one. It's not the bezin bafiyah. The paskin is the kach and makes it truth. Truth is actual correct. Right? We explained the thing. The grammar does not create the actual case. The grammar may help me explain how we turn it into a something to be worked on to everything, but it does not create it as such. And why judgment? This is what really that was the main seminar from last week. Is why we cannot give a concrete rule which is going to be over everything, right? In other words, it has to be a concept of Phronesis. Phronesis is mandatory because you can't have an overarching rule of every single case, every single particular. And that the formation of an institution that does not certify itself that this is the correct way. These are many ways to give over itself. They still not tell me ultimately how I know it is the ultimate correct thing. And as such, how is it possible rather? Now you have two dinim exactly saying, yet one of them is wrong. And that will be in for next week.
The answer is coming next week?
Has a plan, but be honest, it was supposed to be this week. I just thought it was more important to sort of explain the question deep, and also I want to bring the truth concept. And I don't know, we'll see you next week. I keep on changing it.
You wanted to bring up this week is the concept that it's not that Bezin is making the truth themselves. What actually is. And also to explain where the errors can happen. Meaning we can break it down.
Let's put it this way. Last week I was trying to sort of explain the concept of phronesis in general, right? Now the oil knows a Greek word phronesis, for nemos, so we can actually think about it today, because there is no real Greek translation word. The same way eudemeno is also no exactly English translation for it. And we also why it's necessary to have practical reasoning phronesis, why it's not possible, why we need to have that thing. Now I want to go so that, and also we discussed why we can just give random simple teritzim that whatever, they made a mistake, he was tired, he was exhausted, he was forced, whatever it is. A bunch of different ways it's possible for us to make practical errors, but we're saying our case is not talking about such a case. Today, this week, what we ended up discussing was, first of all, the concept was a mean for for truth. It can't be Bezin doesn't make it up by itself. Even if it says that, with a person, I don't get too much into it now, we're getting awful thing, but does not mean that he makes up the truth. That means he's not held accountable, but he can still be wrong, right? That's the Munis and Hedden, where Reuven, when he went to think, he brought a bunch of people with him, he says, if I'm wrong, then if he's the one that makes the whole thing, I think it's a little bit push it, that the Torah, we definitely don't make it up, whatever it is. And I like the Chaim. I don't want to get too much into it, but we don't always say it. And in certain places where you don't say it, there wouldn't be halacha in that case, right? Other than Chaim. And certain places you can say that both can be true under the basic, different levels. No problem. Let's say with that. Well, now this is the Olam Asiyah, right? This is practical practice. So you can't say like it Chaim. You also have from the Toldos and from the Olamai, whatever. He says clearly, if I like in Chaim, again. And what it means to say is that Hashem learns the Torah also, even if it's wrong. That's if you read at certain times you can say both are correct. And the E12, famous E12, the Moral, and these things, yes, and many Chassidus also is correct depending on the oilam. But that is not negayel halucha in the sense practically. I need to know what I'm doing ultimately. I cannot go like it in Chaim when I need to know what I have to practically. It's either or. And me say is maybe I can't say, but aim Pazan Shalishum is alles fine and voil, no problem, great. So we're gonna say he's not a mam's not whatever it is, great. By Sil. But me, I can only follow by Sil, I can't follow by Shammai, right? That's the thing. And also but that is the point. Right now, the question is what am I supposed to do right now? Right? And the main thing I want to show is that how we should take this the system, the Aristotle system, break it down into all its parts, it's not just one way. Do the right thing right now. But what does it mean to be an ethical person? Do the right thing, your practical reasoning, that you know the right thing. Okay, what exactly is it doesn't entail? Let's break it down every single part into a small moving thing, and where can mistakes happen, and what are we discussing, and then going further. That's what I want to do this week, and I think we did it. Right.
This idea
No. Based on the medal.
Based on Maral, based on Maral on the mess.
Yeah, but again, that's what I'm trying to go say.
There's parallel universes. There's the Oil Madrash and the Oil
Yes.
Oil Masiyah, Oil Mapshat, and then there's Oil Madrash where things happen. It's true. It has its own truth. The truth is in the.
But la halacha, we cannot say that, and that's what we're discussing right now. No, I think you also said last week that's you like to I look at him Chaim. That's the reason why I threw it in now. And I said the Olamai says clearly, even though other places he does use it for other things, but then the guy lahalucha and other is saying that Hashem when he learning the halacha part, even if it's wrong, he's still going to learn it in Bezin Shemala, whatever it is. But it doesn't mean that the halacha. Think about it. You destroy all halacha then. Yeah. There's no what I'm doing is right.
Even according to the Rambam thinks that everything's in the Torah, all machlokas are in the Torah. Ultimately, there's a psak that you have to follow.
There's. It's true.
There are.
Yeah, but after bekain, amutara shadits, but it's still not to it.
No, right. In that instance, but the Ramban says that let's say that there's a Sanhedrin. We spoke about this.
The question is if they right. The question.
One of them loses.
No, is the next time, the next day, it's so a crucial thing is right. Now that
the only thing that changes is one person that changed, even though the halacha changes, because ultimately the halacha is in the Torah, and we can it can't change.
So the question over here is, we also say is that does the teva itself change up your Torah? That may be correct. However, no, again, there are sources for that. However, at the end of the day over here is, right now, in this snapshot, as we are right now, this bezin, two bezins paskin, kach v'kach, one is right lalacha, one is wrong lalacha. That is it. That is a fact, right? But again, eventually we are going to, okay, we are probably going to touch upon other things. I have it, something in the future, I know we'll get to this. I'm not going to pretend to say this thing. But the are Nagai, truth, false, whatever it is. However, Nagai to the question we have now, and then the bigger picture of how to come, what ultimately the most blapt, what stays from Aristotle, that's why we can import, export, whatever it is. I think I like the K'mchaim is not Nagai to this part.
That's what you don't take out of this.
Yeah.